Her ex-husband took everything. She left with her mother's bracelet. 2 years later, he saw her on TV. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Grant Mercer saw his ex-wife on television at 6:17 p.m. Mountain Time, and for one full breath, the glass wall of his Denver office stopped reflecting him as a man in control. Lena Hart stood beneath the clean studio lights of a public documentary program, her dark coat buttoned to the throat, her voice steady, her mother's thin gold bracelet resting against the file folder in her hands. 2 years ago, Grant had watched her leave their townhouse with one suitcase, a worn canvas tote, and that bracelet, because everything else had been made complicated enough to belong to him. The savings account had been drained by fees he called necessary. The lease transfer had been buried under amendments he said she misunderstood. The home had slipped away under paperwork he controlled, and by the time the divorce was final, people spoke to Lena as if instability were a personality flaw. Now the lower third on the screen identified her as Lena Hart, tenant-rights paralegal and document organizer, and the narrator called her file work central to a companion civil investigation into legal displacement across the Denver metro area. Grant reached for the remote, missed it, and knocked a silver pen off his desk. It hit the floor with a sound too small for the size of the room. On screen, Maya Torres asked a careful question about how tenants lose credibility before they lose housing. Lena did not look dramatic. She did not cry. She simply touched the edge of the bracelet with her thumb and said, "When the records are arranged by the person who benefits from confusion, the first thing people lose is the right to sound believable." Grant's jaw tightened. He muted the television, but the caption kept moving, without sound, turning her words into text he could not interrupt. His phone buzzed before he could decide whether to be angry or afraid. It was his counsel. Grant answered with the calm voice he used for investors, contractors, and city clerks who needed to be reminded who owned what. "I just saw it," he said. The attorney did not waste time. "Then you should know this is bigger than the documentary. A subpoena came through on the civil matter this afternoon. Deposition notice. Your name is on the witness list." Grant turned from the TV toward the darkening windows. Outside, late fall Denver had gone dry and cold, the kind of early evening chill that made office towers look polished and empty. "A documentary producer can't subpoena me," he said. "No," the attorney replied. "The civil complaint can. The production is only public context." Grant looked back at the screen. Lena was listening to Maya now, calm as a locked drawer. Beside her, on the table, rested a stack of labeled folders from the housing law clinic where she worked. Not a scandal board, not a revenge wall. Files, tabs, dates, the plain tools of someone who had learned how to survive being misread. Grant lowered his voice. "She is not an expert. She is a document organizer with direct knowledge of the records," the attorney said. "That is enough to make this uncomfortable." Grant ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, he stood still, seeing not the woman he had once called careless, but the version of her he had never planned for. Disciplined, visible, believed. Across town, Lena stepped out of the studio, into the cold, with Maya on one side and Rachel Kim, the nonprofit attorney, on the other. Maya asked if she wanted to review tomorrow's cut notes. Rachel reminded her that anything tied to the civil matter stayed inside legal boundaries. Lena nodded to both, polite but already elsewhere. She did not ask whether Grant had seen the broadcast. She did not need to. In the clinic's document room 30 minutes later, she removed her coat, set her mother's bracelet gently beside a locked evidence cabinet, and opened the first labeled folder for the next morning's deposition prep. At the bottom of her tote, beneath a legal pad and a pack of sticky tabs, lay a copy of the old house key she had never found a reason to throw away. She touched it once, then left it there. Not yet. Tonight was not about the house. Tonight was about the record. By 8:12 the next morning, The clinic's document room had the quiet pressure of a place built for people who had run out of patience with chaos. Lena stood at the long work table under fluorescent lights, sorting copies into clean stacks, while the heat clicked through the vents, and the windows held a pale view of dry Denver cold. Rachel Kim had marked the deposition prep schedule in blue ink: witness boundaries, exhibit order, privileged material, public-facing material, do not discuss material. Maya's documentary notes sat in a separate folder on the far corner of the table, clipped shut, because Lena had insisted on a bright line between story and record. The bracelet on her wrist slid once against the metal edge of a 3-ring binder, as she reached for a lease amendment dated 2 months after Grant had told everyone she had caused the default. She read the date twice, not because she doubted it, but because old fear had trained her to check every fact until the fact could stand without her voice. Outside the conference room across the hall, Grant arrived 10 minutes early in a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and the controlled impatience of a man used to buildings opening for him. He did not look toward the document room at first. He spoke to his attorney near the reception desk, his voice lowered, but not low enough. "This is exactly what she used to do," he said. "She always confused paperwork with truth." The sentence moved through the hall and found Lena before any person did. Her hand stopped above the folder. For a second, the room was not the clinic. It was the townhouse kitchen 2 years earlier, a stack of notices between them, Grant's calm expression turning her confusion into evidence against her. It was the bank statement, with fees she had not understood until the cushion was already gone. It was the property manager speaking to Grant, not to her, because Grant had made himself sound practical and made her sound overwhelmed. Lena felt the old impulse rise, sharp and humiliating. Step into the hall, correct him, make him admit she had not imagined it. But the bracelet touched her pulse, cool and slight, and she heard her own breathing settle. Rachel appeared at the doorway, not rescuing her, just noticing the pause. "You okay to continue?" she asked. Lena looked at the amendment in her hand. "Yes." Her voice came out even. "But I want the master index moved up before the email summaries." Rachel studied her for one beat, then nodded. "That works. Keep it factual." Grant's footsteps passed the door. He glanced in, saw Lena at the table, and gave a small, polite smile that belonged in investor meetings and difficult closings. "Lena," he said, as if they had run into each other at a lobby coffee station. "Grant." She did not add anything. The lack of explanation made the air tighten more than an argument would have. He looked at the stacks, the tabs, the numbered labels. Still building castles out of paper? Lena placed the lease amendment into Exhibit Group B and wrote the number cleanly on the index sheet. "No," she said, "just putting things in order." His smile thinned. The old Grant would have waited for her to defend herself until she sounded emotional enough to dismiss. This Lena did not give him that gift. When he stepped away, she took the first page of the email metadata summary and set it beneath the amendment, then placed the repair invoice under both. The sequence was not ready to accuse anyone. Not yet. It only had to be ready to survive questions. By the time Rachel called everyone into prep, Lena had made her choice. She would not ask Grant to believe her. She would make the record harder to bend than his memory. By noon, Lena had turned the clinic's document room into a map of pressure no one could call personal anymore. The long table held 5 adult tenant files, each clipped in the same order: lease, amendment, notice, invoice, email summary, complaint exhibit. She did not place her own divorce folder at the center. She put it at the left edge, where a starting point belonged, and made herself treat it like any other record that had to earn its place. The work steadied her, but it did not make the cost disappear. Every tab she wrote in neat black ink pulled her back to a night when she had sat on the townhouse floor with unopened mail around her knees, trying to understand how a home could vanish one signature at a time. Now she checked the signatures without trembling. She checked dates. She checked who had access to the property portal. She checked whether the repair invoices were billed before or after the notices that accused tenants of creating the damage. Rachel came in with a legal pad and a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. "Remember, she said. We organize the facts. We do not argue the case in the file room. Lena slid a folder toward her. I know. That is why this one is out. Rachel looked down. The tenant's handwritten note had no date, no copy, no supporting record. It was emotionally clear and legally weak. Good call, Rachel said. That was all. She did not praise Lena like a survivor. She treated her like staff who knew the work, and Lena appreciated the dignity of that more than comfort. Maya arrived 20 minutes later, careful at the doorway, carrying a release binder against her chest. I can keep this segment focused on the pattern, she said. No private divorce details unless you approve. Lena did not look up from the index. No private divorce details unless they are already part of the civil record and Rachel clears them. Maya accepted the correction without argument. The documentary could make the public listen, but it could not become the proof. Proof had to survive, without music, without lighting, without the soft mercy of editing. Across town, Grant's property office received the first call from an investor who had seen the broadcast clips circulating among people who did business with him. Grant kept his voice measured while he stood beside a framed map of rental holdings spread across the Denver metro area. It is a documentary, he said. They shape a narrative. Civil complaints are filed every day. But when the call ended, he did not immediately put the phone down. The phrase document organizer bothered him more than ex-wife would have. An ex-wife could be dismissed as emotional. A document organizer could make other people patient enough to read. By late afternoon, Lena found the first clean hinge. A repair invoice for $1,240 had been issued to Grant's property company 9 days before the default notice that blamed the tenant for the same damage. The invoice did not prove everything. It did not need to. It proved sequence. She placed it beneath the lease amendment and opened the email metadata summary beside it. The dates did not shout. They aligned. Rachel returned, read the row in silence, and said, "This goes into the prep set." Carefully, Lena wrote the exhibit number with a hand that stayed steady. Outside, the sky had gone silver over Denver, and the office windows reflected her face back at her beside the bracelet on her wrist. Grant had spent years making confusion look like her weakness. Lena was beginning to see that order could be her answer. The deposition room was colder than the hallway, not because the heat had failed, but because everyone inside knew the rules required restraint. A rectangular table filled most of the conference room at a law office near downtown Denver. The court reporter sat at one end, with her machine ready. Rachel Kim sat beside Lena, with a slim binder of boundaries and objections, and Grant Mercer sat across from them in a navy suit that looked chosen to make him appear reasonable. He greeted Rachel first, then Lena, as if politeness could erase the years between them. "Good morning," he said. Lena answered, "Good morning," and opened her notebook to the first tab. Nothing in her voice offered him a place to stand. The first hour moved through names, business entities, property access, and who had authority to approve lease amendments for the Mercer Property Company. Grant was smooth when the questions stayed broad. He described himself as a practical operator, a man who handled old buildings, difficult tenants, and misunderstood paperwork. When Rachel asked whether his office maintained digital copies of notices and repair invoices, he leaned back half an inch. "Generally, yes," he said, "but property records can be messy. People misread them all the time." Lena did not look up. She wrote the word "generally" in the margin and waited. Rachel placed the first exhibit in front of him, a lease amendment bearing his company's letterhead and an electronic approval line attached to his office login. "Do you recognize this document?" she asked. Grant glanced at it, then at Lena, as if expecting the old reflex, the rush to explain herself. "It appears to be an amendment," he said. "For the record," Rachel said, "is that a yes?" His jaw shifted. "Yes." The court reporter's keys clicked softly. Lena felt the sound settle somewhere under her ribs. Not victory. Not yet. Just record. Rachel moved to the date. Grant answered carefully, then added, "Again, I would caution everyone not to confuse a document date with the full truth of what happened." It was almost the same sentence, from the hall, polished for legal air. Lena's hand tightened around her pen. For one beat, the room tilted toward the townhouse kitchen, toward Grant explaining her own life to her, with patient disappointment. Then she turned one page in her binder and slid a sticky note forward for Rachel, not dramatically, not secretly. Exhibit Group B. Rachel saw it, paused, and adjusted her next question. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit B3. Is this a repair invoice issued to your company for $1,240? Grant read it longer than necessary. That is what it says. And the invoice date? Rachel asked. October 9th. Now looking back at Exhibit B1, the default notice to the tenant. What is the date on that notice? Grant's attorney shifted slightly, but did not object. Grant's mouth flattened. October 18th. Lena kept her eyes on the page. 9 days. Not an accusation, not a speech, not a wound begging to be believed. Just 9 days sitting in the open, where Grant could not rearrange them with tone. Rachel continued. So the repair invoice was issued before the notice blaming the tenant for failing to address that same condition? Grant looked toward Lena again. This time his polite smile did not arrive. That is one interpretation. Lena lifted her eyes. The dates are not an interpretation, she said, calm enough that even Grant's attorney looked over. Rachel did not rescue her. She did not need to. She simply said, let the witness answer. Grant exhaled through his nose. Yes, the invoice came first. The court reporter captured it. Outside the windows, Denver's dry afternoon light faded against the glass, and inside the room something old lost its first piece of ground. Grant had come prepared to make Lena sound confused. Instead, he had authenticated the beginning of her order. By the next afternoon, Grant had stopped treating the deposition as an inconvenience and started treating it as a threat to the shape of his business. The first admission was not enough to ruin him, but it was enough to travel. An investor who usually spoke to him in quick numbers and closing dates called, with a slower voice, asking whether the documentary would name properties connected to the civil complaint. A property manager forwarded a message from a tenant-rights mailing list with the subject line clipped and cautious. Even one of Grant's lenders asked for a written clarification before moving forward on a refinancing package tied to a small apartment building in the Denver metro area. Grant answered each person with the same disciplined tone. This is a paperwork dispute being framed for television, he said. Nothing more. But after the third call, he closed his office door and looked at his own shelves of binders, as if they had become witnesses. At the clinic, Lena heard about the pressure only through proper channels. Rachel told her enough to prepare her, not enough to turn the day into gossip. There may be settlement language proposed, Rachel said, standing beside the document table, with her reading glasses in one hand. If anything comes in, I handle the legal response. You keep the exhibits clean. Lena nodded. No leaks. No commentary. Exactly. Maya arrived later, with a rough segment list, her expression careful. The producer in me wants to say this is getting clearer, she said. The responsible person in me knows. That makes it more delicate. Lena appreciated the honesty, but she did not open the folder right away. The segment can show the pattern, she said. It can't make the pattern. The documents have to do that. Maya accepted it and stepped back. That was the line Lena needed everyone to respect. She would not let a camera rescue her, and she would not let a camera exaggerate what the record could prove. By 4 o'clock, Grant's attorney sent a proposal, through Rachel, broad confidentiality, delayed public correction, no admission of intentional wrongdoing, and a private statement from Grant expressing regret for miscommunications that may have affected Lena personally. Rachel read it, without changing expression, then gave Lena the non-privileged shape of it in plain terms. They want quiet, no real correction yet, and no tenant release language in the current version. Lena looked at the evidence cabinet. Her mother's bracelet pressed lightly under her sleeve. 2 years earlier, she might have mistaken that kind of offer for peace. It had the vocabulary of maturity, regret, privacy, misunderstanding, closure. It also left the machinery intact. No, Lena said. Rachel waited, giving her room to add only what she chose. If the record says miscommunication, he gets to keep calling confusion an accident. And if affected tenants stay bound to the same terms, then this is just a cleaner way to leave them where they are. Rachel nodded once. That is a factual concern. I'll respond from the legal side. Lena returned to the files, but the cost followed her into every page. She knew what Grant would say now, because he had said it before with better lighting and kinder words. He would call her bitter. He would call her unwilling to move on. He would say she had chosen public damage over private resolution. And some people who preferred calm men in polished offices to women with labeled folders and steady hands, would believe him for a while. That hurt more than she wanted it to. Still, she pulled the next adult tenant file forward and checked the date on the repair invoice against the notice. Across town, Grant stared at the rejected proposal and understood that Lena had refused the one thing he was still offering, as if it were generosity, silence. The pattern did not arrive like a confession. It arrived in small, stubborn alignments that made denial work harder each time Lena placed one page beside another. By Thursday morning, the clinic's document room held 6 adult tenant files in neat rows, each one stripped of drama and arranged by sequence: lease, amendment, repair record, notice, correspondence, complaint exhibit. Lena moved from stack to stack with a pencil, a ruler, and a yellow legal pad, checking that every date could be traced back to a lawful copy. She did not use words like scheme or fraud in the margins. She wrote safer words that could survive pressure. Same sequence, same office login, notice after invoice, amendment after access change. Rachel reviewed the labels beside her, quiet and exact. This is stronger when it stays boring, Rachel said. Lena almost smiled. Boring is harder to dismiss. Across the table, Maya watched without filming. Her camera stayed zipped in its case, because Lena had made the rule clear. No visual record of unreviewed files, no tenant names in the documentary notes, no turning active civil material into atmosphere. Maya pointed to the pattern chart only, after Rachel nodded. Can I say the files show repeated timing issues? She asked. Not names, not addresses. Lena considered the phrase. Say the records raise repeated timing questions, she said. Questions are accurate. Conclusions belong somewhere else. That discipline cost her more than anyone in the room could see. Each file seemed to offer a louder word, a sharper sentence, the kind of line that would make people understand quickly. But quick understanding had hurt her once. Grant had understood quickly, too, and used confidence as if it were proof. Lena would rather be slow and right. By mid-afternoon, a message from Rachel's office line confirmed that Grant's side had received the updated exhibit list. 20 minutes later, Grant called his property manager, then his attorney, then an investor whose name had once opened doors before anyone asked for supporting documents. The investor did not sound angry. That was worse. We're going to pause until there's more clarity, the man said. No one wants surprises tied to housing complaints right now. Grant stood in his office, with one hand on the back of his chair. There is no surprise, he said. My ex-wife is organizing unrelated files to make a point. That may be your view, the investor replied. But the dates are going to matter to our underwriters. After the call, Grant stared at his reflection in the window. For the first time, the word ex-wife did not protect him. Lena was not standing on a sidewalk with a suitcase anymore. She was sitting inside a record he could not remove her from. At the clinic, Lena found the next hinge in an email metadata summary that showed a notice drafted before the repair response had been logged as reviewed. She checked it twice, then a third time, then set it into the chart only after matching it against the invoice. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Her shoulders ached from hours of leaning over paper, and the bracelet had left a faint crescent mark against her skin. She thought of the old house key still buried in her tote, useless and heavy, a small piece of metal from a life Grant had taught other people to see as her failure. She could have taken it out. She could have let herself feel the old rage. Instead, she opened a new label and wrote Exhibit Group C. Grant had built power by making confusion look natural. Lena was building something colder, smaller, and far more dangerous to him, a sequence no one had to love her to understand. Grant's first real loss came without raised voices. It arrived in an email at 7:43 a.m., written in the careful language of people protecting money, without admitting fear. A planned refinancing package tied to one of his smaller Denver metro properties was being placed on hold pending clarification of the civil complaint, documentary references, and related deposition materials. No accusation, no threat, just pause, review, reassess. Grant read the message 3 times in his office, while the city outside sat under a dry, gray late-fall sky. He had built half his reputation on sounding like the least emotional person in any room. Now the least emotional people were stepping back from him. His attorney called, before he could finish drafting a response. "The exhibit list is the issue," she said, "not the broadcast. The broadcast made people look. The records are making them stay." Grant walked to the window. "They're letting Lena frame this." "No," his attorney said. "The dates are framing it. That is the problem." He hated the precision of that answer. For years, he had trusted complexity to protect him. A lease amendment here, a maintenance delay there, a notice worded broadly enough to sound neutral. People got tired before they got certain. Lena used to get tired, too. She would sit at the kitchen table, with documents spread around her, asking him to explain the sequence, and he would answer in a calm voice that made her doubt the question instead of the paper. Now she had done the one thing he had never prepared for. She had stopped asking him to explain. At the clinic, Lena did not know about the exact email, only that Grant's side had requested a narrowed exhibit discussion before the next deposition session. Rachel delivered the update with professional restraint. "They may be trying to limit scope," she said. "We will respond within the civil process. You keep the sequence clean." Lena nodded and returned to Exhibit Group C. Her shoulders still ached from the previous day, and there was a faint bruise of fatigue under her eyes, but her hands moved steadily. She removed one page from the set because its source path was not clean enough. The page would have helped emotionally. It would not have helped legally. That choice cost her a little. It meant leaving out something that made Grant look worse, because the record mattered more than her anger. Across town, Grant sat in a conference room with his attorney and a property manager who no longer looked at him with automatic loyalty. On the table lay a draft correction statement his attorney had prepared in cautious language. Prior statements regarding tenant responsibility may have been incomplete. Certain lease terms would be reviewed. Affected adult tenants could be released from disputed provisions subject to documented review. Grant pushed the paper back. "That sounds like I'm admitting I lied." His attorney did not soften it. "It sounds like you are reducing exposure before the record does it for you." The property manager looked down. Grant caught the movement and felt something colder than anger. Disbelief had started inside his own room. He thought of Lena's face across the deposition table, calm when she said the dates were not an interpretation, not triumphant, not pleading, calm. That was what cracked him, not kindness and not nostalgia. She had stopped needing him to agree that she was sane. Grant reached for the draft again, then stopped. "If I signed any correction," he said, "it does not mean she gets to turn this into some personal victory." His attorney held his gaze. "This is not about what she gets. It is about what you can still tell the truth about before someone else tells it for you." By evening, Rachel received notice that Grant's side would discuss limited withdrawal of prior claims and potential tenant release language before the next deposition session. She told Lena only what was appropriate. Lena listened, then closed the folder she had been reviewing. There was no relief in her face, only recognition. Grant was not redeemed. He was cornered by the truth he had tried to manage. And if he wanted any path forward that did not repeat the old harm, the price would be public, practical, and his alone to pay. The next deposition session began at 9:05 a.m. in the same conference room, but the air had changed. Grant arrived without the easy polish he had worn the first time. His suit was still perfect, his watch still expensive, his voice still controlled, but the control had become work. Lena sat across from him with exhibit groups B and C stacked in front of her, each tab aligned, each copy marked for reference, her mother's bracelet resting just above the cuff of her sweater. Rachel reviewed the boundaries before they went on the record, No speeches, no speculation, no documentary commentary. Only documents, sequence, and testimony. Grant's attorney agreed, though her face showed she knew the sequence was exactly the danger. The court reporter lifted her hands to the machine, and the room entered that strange civil quiet where every ordinary sentence could become consequence. Rachel started with the lease amendment Grant had already authenticated, then the repair invoice for $1,240, then the default notice dated 9 days later. Grant confirmed each one, with shorter answers than before. Yes, that appears correct. That is the date shown. Lena did not move too quickly. She waited for each answer to settle into the record before sliding the next sticky note to Rachel. The old version of her would have rushed, afraid the truth might disappear if she did not say everything at once. This version trusted order. Rachel placed the email metadata summary on the table. Mr. Mercer, this summary reflects an email notice drafted from your office account before the repair response was logged as reviewed. Do you dispute that sequence? Grant looked down. The silence stretched long enough that the court reporter glanced up. I do not dispute the sequence, he said. Rachel's voice stayed even. And when you represented to others that Ms. Hart and later these tenants had created confusion by failing to understand the paperwork, you had access to records showing notices were being prepared after internal repair issues were already known? Grant's attorney shifted. Objection to form. You may answer if you understand. Grant kept his eyes on the page. Lena could see the fight in him, the old instinct searching for a cleaner phrase. But the dates gave him no graceful exit. Yes, he said. The word was small. It did not repair anything by itself, but it entered the room like a door closing behind him. Rachel moved to the proposed correction language and the disputed lease terms. Grant confirmed that prior statements blaming Lena's confusion had been incomplete. He confirmed that affected adult tenants would be released from the disputed provisions under the negotiated civil framework. He confirmed he would not seek private contact with Lena to resolve the matter outside the process. That last answer made him look up. For the first time all morning, he spoke directly to her. Lena, I should have said a lot of this before. The room tightened around the personal turn. Lena held his gaze, not unkindly, not warmly. Say it where it belongs, she said. On the record, Grant's face changed then, not into goodness, not into redemption, but into the first honest recognition that apology without cost was only another form of access. He turned back toward the court reporter. My prior statements about Lena Hart being confused by the paperwork were false and incomplete, he said. I used the complexity of the records to protect my position. No one in the room celebrated. Rachel continued with the formal questions. Grant answered. The record absorbed each sentence, without music, without mercy, without needing anyone to believe Lena, because they loved her. Later, in the clinic's document room, Maya stood outside the doorway, while Rachel checked what could and could not be referenced publicly. Lena placed the deposition copies into the evidence cabinet herself. On the monitor in the corner, paused from the documentary review file, her own image remained frozen beneath studio lights, Bracelet visible as she held a folder against her chest. Grant had seen that image and thought it was the threat. He had been wrong. The threat was what Lena built after the camera stopped. A file trail, so clean that truth no longer needed permission from the man who had once arranged confusion around it. The correction did not make Grant Mercer noble. It made him accountable in ways he could not polish for a room. Over the next week, the civil matter moved through its proper channels, and the public statement that finally appeared under his company's name was careful, limited, and damaging enough to be real. Prior claims about Lena Hart's handling of the records were withdrawn. Disputed lease provisions for affected adult tenants were released under the negotiated framework. Grant's investors did not disappear all at once, but the Easy Trust did. One refinancing package stayed paused. A property partner asked for independent review before signing anything new. Men who used to accept his calm as proof now asked to see documents first. That consequence was not prison, not spectacle, not the kind of ending that lets everyone pretend harm is simple. It was quieter and more precise. Grant lost control of the housing narrative because the narrative had been built on control. At the clinic, Lena kept working. Maya's documentary aired its revised segment, without naming real institutions, without using private pain as entertainment, and without turning the camera into a savior. Rachel handled the legal boundaries. Lena handled the files. The bracelet appeared again on screen for less than 3 seconds, catching light as Lena closed a folder, and strangers later wrote that she looked brave. Lena did not feel brave when she read that. She felt tired. She felt grateful. She felt the dull ache of 2 years that no correction could refund. One evening, after the final deposition copies were logged, Grant waited in the clinic lobby with permission from counsel and nowhere else to stand. He wore no overcoat this time, just a suit jacket, and the look of a man learning that access was not the same as apology. "I won't ask you to start over," he said, when Lena stepped out of the document room. The sentence was careful, almost decent. "I just wanted to say I understand more now." Lena looked at him for a long moment. She remembered wanting that sentence once so badly that she would have mistaken it for home. Now it arrived too late to be a door. "Understanding is yours to live with," she said. "It is not mine to reward." Grant lowered his eyes, and for once he did not argue with the boundary. That was the closest he came to redemption, not winning her back, not making her soften, not turning accountability into romance, but leaving when she gave him no place to return to. After he was gone, the clinic settled into its evening quiet. Outside, Denver was cold and clear, office lights scattered across the dark like small records of people still working. Lena returned to the document room alone. She placed her mother's bracelet beside the labeled case files, then locked the evidence cabinet with a small, final click. For a moment, she stood with her hand on the drawer, feeling the cost of being believed after years of being made doubtful. Then she reached into her tote and took out the copy of the old house key. It was lighter than she remembered. She slid it into a clean evidence envelope, sealed the flap, and wrote one word across the label in steady black ink: closed. This is a fictional story for entertainment. Any resemblance to real people, companies, nonprofits, media outlets, institutions, or events is coincidental.